Hello and welcome to Thank You Half Hour. I'm your host, Tom Christopher Warren, and today's guest I am so excited for. Now, she's not just a regular Broadway star. She's a cool Broadway star. And my listeners will recognize her from, and forgive me if I'm taking a deep breath to get through this exhaustive list, but original Broadway casts of Mean Girls, Spongebob Squarepants, Honeymoon in Vegas, 9 to 5, Legally Blonde, stepping into Broadway companies of Wicked, Kinky Boots, national tours of the Addams Family, and Seussical. She's a voice teacher. She's a mom. She's a rock star. Gaelen Gilliland, thank you so much for coming and joining me today. How are you?
Thank you. Thank you. It's so great to be here, Tom. I just have to correct one thing. I was not in the original cast of Mean Girls. I was on the first national tour.
First national tour, right, of course, with our mutual friend Eric Huffman, who set all of this up, who hooked us up together. I'm very grateful to him. Thank you, Eric. And how long were you on the road for with Mean Girls?
So we set out in September of 2019.
Okay.
And then got shut down during the, infamous pandemic.
Yep.
At March of 2020. And I had a baby over the pandemic, had every intention of going back to that tour. My husband was also out there with me. He's a stagehand. And so he was working the tour as well. And we said, we're going to take this 3-4-month-old baby and our giant golden retriever, buy a car and drive the tour.
Yeah.
And we ended up, as it turns out, he booked another Broadway show because Waitress came back on the road or came back to Broadway, strangely.
Yep.
And so he ended up going into that one. And I said, great, let's stay put. And so we didn't go back out on the road, sadly. So we've been here since.
I want to talk about, in a moment, I want to talk about what it's like to tour as a family. Touring in general is a bananas concept, but touring as a family is a whole other thing. But I wanted Eric Huffman, who hooked us up, I want to tell you the quote that he gave me a little background information. And he said, she could party just as hard as any of the 21-year-olds and then turn around and politely teach them how to be a professional at work. And I love that because for those of us, over the age of 30, let's say, and I'm well past the age of 30, it is a different industry. It's a different industry post-pandemic, but also I'd love to hear from you what it's like looking through your lens today versus what was your first Broadway show? Was that Wicked?
It was, yes, Wicked, like a year after it opened. So it was like my favorite Broadway show and my debut. So it was surreal.
Oh my God. And it was brand new. I mean, a year old of that show. I remember when Wicked opened, it was the hottest talk of the town. That's all anyone wanted to talk about. It was all anyone wanted to talk about when it was in San Francisco, before it even came to Broadway. So, and it has remained one of the top grossing pieces of theater ever. And to step into that with a huge cast, and now how many years later are we? 20, I guess.
Yeah.
They've
20 from its opening. So yeah.
Yeah. So you're looking through a lens 20 years later, working with, we are essentially working with the next generation of young artists. What does that feel like for you?
So it's funny that Eric said that because I was getting ready to go out on the tour. I knew that my husband was going. Sadly, we had just lost our dog, and I needed a change of scenery, and it came along just at the right time. Mm-hmm. I had seen the Broadway show of Mean Girls, and I knew that I was right for this part, and I said, I should be doing that. So when the tour came around, and I was still very sad about losing our dog, my husband sort of took me by the shoulders and said, look, you got to get out there. This is a great show for you, and there's no reason why I couldn't go with you. So sort of moved through the grief and got through the audition. And he was, although casting has nothing to do with how and when the crew gets hired, I was accepting and negotiating the job, but I was planning to hopefully be out there with him, but not knowing yet.
Yeah.
Anyway, long story longer, he ends up booking. We end up going out there together. And right before I left for the tour, someone said to me, do you feel like trepidatious about going out with a bunch of young people? And do you feel like you're going to be isolated because you're going to be, the adult? And I was like, well, that never occurred to me. I always feel like I'm still 25. I feel like I can hang. And it is isolating because the role is isolating. You're not on stage with everybody very often, and except for maybe once in like the gym scene, are you really on stage at large with the company, being able to sort of catch everyone in the eye without like having a big spiel about
Yeah.
calculus or something.
Yeah.
And so it was strange on tour because I felt that I could hang. I also would say stuff that I thought was hilarious, and they'd be like, "Oh, and I'm like, oh man, I'm not funny to these guys in the same way." And at the same time, this generation is so much more savvy
Yeah.
and so much more with it and knowledgeable and willing to do the work and to rest and all the stuff that we didn't think we had to do when we were in our 20s on Broadway or whatever. We thought, oh, there was plenty of partying, and I know there still is,
Sure.
but you're not like the goody goodies were taking care of themselves and going home and going to sleep.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that everyone wasn't pulling their weight at work generally.
Yeah.
But everyone is pulling their weight at work on the professional highest tier levels now, because those kids come out of school so sharp and so savvy and knowing things that I didn't even know what an EPA was when I got out of school. I was like, I think I know what Sweeney Todd is. I know Sondheim has written a lot of stuff, but I was just late to the game and really catching up a lot. And so to say that it was 10 years after I graduated, before I even made my Broadway debut, felt just right for me.
Yeah.
And other people are booking right out of school, and that just wasn't my road. I also, was going to play roles and understudy roles later in life because I was always sort of a mature leading lady, or understudying the ladies. So that was always my lot in life, and so I needed to wait to get older a little bit.
Sure. Well, it was also different then in that casts they skewed a little older, right? So you were competing probably out of school with 30-year-olds, and you're 25, and now the shows are written for younger performers. There's
Very
more
true.
athleticism to the dance. I mean, the dancers that are graduating college or not even going to college, are rushing into shows because their dance expectancy is immediate. It's urgent right now. So yeah, I find that casts are skewing younger. It's funny. I did a production of Spring Awakening here in Columbus, and as the adult male, and went into it expecting to feel isolated and like the old man, unlike you. And
part of you.
Yeah, well, and I wound up falling in love with every one of them and finding all of these kids to be engaged and fascinated and curious and passionate about it. And I expected to watch them have a great time and ended up having a great time with them, which was unexpected for me.
Great.
A bonus. Yeah.
I mean, I had my husband out there with me, so I at least had that companion. But he, as I said, was a stagehand, so he was often busy on the days off.
Yeah.
Floating in the or traveling, whatever.
So tell us a little bit about the Mean Girls tour schedule. For those, I feel a lot of my listeners are younger, right, up and coming at the beginnings of their careers. Talk about the Mean Girls national tour. You were the first national. Were you doing week, double week? What were your stays like?
It was like 1 to 3 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
At least in the portion of the tour that I did. And we were just about to get into some 3, 4, 5, 6 week stays. I think we did Chicago for 6 weeks over Christmas, which was really great.
That's great.
And so it was about to be like really cushy. It had been, no less, of course, than a week in each spot. And we were hitting a lot of Midwest, a lot of East Coast. But we were about to like spend the summer all in California. And do all these really great cities. And I think we were doing Denver for a few weeks, and it was just starting to get really sweet. And then we shut down. And so we sort of missed that really cool, like gliding through the rest of, our contracts. So we were out for 6 months before it shut down.
And you originated the tour, yeah?
Yes.
So you worked with Tina Fey?
Yes.
Yeah. First of all, what was auditioning? You have a background in improv? Or sketch comedy, or like?
I mean, only in sort of play, not in like, you know, not in study necessarily. Like
Okay.
I enjoy it, but I'm not, you know, writing my own SNL sketches or anything.
Sure, but you have to walk into an audition room and make Tina Fey laugh. What was that like?
Well, she doesn't really laugh that much. If she thinks it's funny, she's sort of internal about it. And I think that the feedback that I got from Casey Nicola, the director, was she thinks you're more Mrs. George than Ms. Norbury. And so can you sort of make yourself more grounded and be more and I said, be more Tina Fey, be more, Ms. Norbury's, her version of Ms. Norbury.
Right.
And I said, absolutely, I can certainly do that.
Yeah.
And it was funny in playing these three different characters, they really challenged me to be as different as possible in each of them because they want the audience to not recognize the same actress coming out as these three roles. That's the nature of the part. And obviously making them look very different, but perform very differently. And where I am very Mrs. George kind of performer on stage, that was trickier to find than I realized not until I got into the role. I mean, putting the audition together was successful enough for me to book the job, but
Yeah.
like shaping her from start to finish in the show was trickier to me than I thought it would be. Ms. Norbury, I found a little sooner. And Mrs. Heron is so small a role that you just have to be super like Earth Mother type
Right.
to tell the story in each of those scenes that she does. But
And she's the
I
first
feel
one
like,
we meet, right?
yes, in the opening number. Yes.
In the opening number, right.
Shouting to her daughter and
Yeah.
sending her off to her first day of school eventually. And it just sort of was interesting to me, even in our final run through in the studio before we left, to go tech out of town. I didn't feel like I really had it. And as far as working with and performing for Tina Fey, I just kept looking at her like, it's gonna get better. Please just wait, just don't fire me. And I was so looking forward to this LA run of the show because all the creatives were coming back and they were going to finally see my settled version of these characters. And of course, we didn't get there because of the pandemic. But she's like, "Oh yeah, you're getting a hold of it now," and I'm like, "Not yet, not yet." I love getting inside something and realizing, oh my gosh, what a different ride than I expected. And
Yeah.
this was.
Well, it's interesting because often the device of having a single actor portray multiple roles is used as a comedic device, right? Gentleman's Guide, Jefferson Mays. We're in on the joke as the audience. We want to know that you're the same actor. I find it really interesting that they are leaning in the other direction with Mean Girls, that we want to be surprised that this one remarkable actress is embodying all these roles. I think that's cool.
Yeah, it's very cool. And it wasn't new to me because in Legally Blonde, I played so many different characters. And so that's why the show feels so similar. It's so pink. It's so girly, but also girl empowered.
Yeah.
Central characters. And it was even when I sat in the audience of Mean Girls, I thought, this feels like I'm seeing a production of Legally Blonde.
I know this, yeah.
I know Nell Benjamin is the one crossover with that creative team, but she's so clever and they're all so witty, of course. I mean,
Yeah.
And it's just, it just felt that I was preparing during Legally Blonde for Mean Girls in that same sense of playing all those roles. Because, Legally Blonde, I think I was 8 different characters in the first 20 minutes of the show, like jumping in and out of costumes very quickly.
Well, both shows are breakneck. They're both relentless in their drive and their forward motion in the very best possible way. So,
Yes.
I hadn't really considered the similarities, but
yeah,
God, I love them both.
Nothing is similar about each of my roles in them at all in the next sense because Legally Blonde, I was busy, and got lots of downtime during Mean Girls. So, and also featured ensemble as opposed to a principal role is the older I get and the more principal roles I'm starting to play, the sort of more downtime I'm getting because of the roles that I'm made for are sort of come in and do your thing and hopefully grab the audience attention and then leave and let the young ones do the hard work, because they definitely are in Mean Girls.
I know, right?
They're busting their butts all the time.
Unbelievable. Well, and then there's Diana in Next to Normal, right? Which you did somewhat recently. Yeah.
Yes, I did right before the tour.
What, not an illustration of any rest or any downtime or any like let the other ones carry the heavy lifting. She carries, I mean, it's a cast of what, five or six.
Yeah.
So no one has a light load in that show. But that thing is a beast.
It's such a beast, and I've never done a role that affected me outside of the show more.
How so?
I was doing it in New Jersey and pretty far into New Jersey at a small theater for a friend who was directing, and it's a role I've always wanted to do. And of course, I went in for it when I was on Broadway years ago to cover, and felt good about that, but I think I was still a little young for it. And so when it came about, I was definitely interested in it. And because I was making a long journey to go to the theater from Manhattan, I found that my preparation started an hour before I even left my house, because I was, of course, warming up and getting myself ready, sort of makeup and hair wise, so that I wouldn't have to do it as much there.
Yeah.
Which is not usually the case for me. I like to do all of my prep in that respect in the theater. But then the long train ride, which was a little stressful about arriving, on time, and then trekking from the station to the theater and all that jazz, and realizing the journey that I needed to go on to play that role was about to begin. So hours before it, my body would sort of prepare itself to be really a raw nerve, so that I could get all of those emotions out front, so that I could pull from them for each of, for that journey. And I remember a friend riding with me in the train, and I was so anxious, and he was like, "Whoa, are you okay?" I'm like, "This is what this role does to me.
Yeah.
I need to be a heightened sense of myself, so that I have all these facets available."
Yeah.
And so that I can do this journey. And I remember a guy, because I was doing it with a lot of people who theater was more of a hobby, or they were, it was pretty much a community theater, although it's called Homedale Theater in New Jersey, and it's a sweet little space, and they put on some great productions and bring in some great people. Most of the people there are either doing it as a hobby or just brand new to doing theater.
Wow.
And and so as the sort of seasoned one of the bunch, someone asked me, "Can you just cry on cue?" And I'm like, it's not, to me, it's not about that.
Right.
It's about getting the emotion that brings you there, because that's acting, right?
Right.
That's drawing on your experiences, and that's the way I've been taught. It's not just to be like, and cry. It's about thinking of those things that get me to the place where I'm crying for real about them. And some nights the tears weren't there, and sometimes they were. And I always told myself, don't force it.
Yeah.
Don't think about it. Just let it happen. And if it doesn't, that's just where you are.
Yeah.
And that's what life is, right?
That show, I did the show a number of years ago, and it's so well crafted. And by the time that birthday cake comes out, if you're paying attention, right, if you're listening and you're responding, and you're surrounded by 5 other actors with whom you've built a trust and a bond, there's no way, whether you cry or not, there is no way to not be affected by that material. It's also the hardest music I've ever had to learn. So
it's the best. Yeah, and it's the best reveal of a plot twist
ever
in any show I've ever seen.
Yes. The first time I saw it in New York, I just gasped. I went in blind. I didn't know anything about it. I guess I'd seen the Tony performance maybe, but I still didn't know contextually what was happening. And it's certainly the most emotional payoff I've had, and the hardest I've ever had to work. I don't ever want to work that hard learning musically ever again. My brain doesn't function that way. So you're balancing just the intelligence of the music, and there's no hiding because it's such a small cast. Everyone has one part, right? and the emotional landscape of the play. And it's thrilling.
Yeah, it's tricky, and it's one of the more difficult roles I've ever played, and it's something that I want to do again, but I'm also like balancing everything in life and then doing something like that is a whole different game now too. But it brings on a whole different bunch of, feelings to access.
Well, you had not had a child yet when you did the show, yes? So now
Correct.
you
But
have a
I had
son.
just lost my fur baby, and so I
Yep.
used to had a
You had
lot
that.
because it was really what brought me there.
Yeah.
A lot.
How are you balancing family life with the wackiness of this industry currently?
So it's it's wild, and it also makes you decide what's most important and what you want to. I mean, I just what you want to take and not take is what the end of that sentence was.
Yeah.
But it was really what's really wild is I'm able to primarily be home to take care of my child because my husband works constantly,
Sure.
and we are in a tiny apartment that we can make work for
Yeah.
this scenario, and to put it kindly. And so it's been humbling to one be offered stuff because people understand what I'm capable of, and I'm so flattered by just being asked to do anything,
Yeah.
but also to not be able to pick up and just leave and go do a production somewhere is wild to suddenly not be able to do. The identity has completely shifted because
Mm.
what's most important is being at home. And however, I have not forgotten or not become a whole different performer. I'm still the same performer. People ask like, "Oh my gosh, first show back, I think was my son was like 3 months, August, 4 months old." I
Wow.
was suddenly asked to replace in Black No More, just an off Broadway show uh, down at the Signature Theater. And they're like, they're in tech now. The girl just dropped out, and they thought of you. Can you go do it and start rehearsal in a couple days? And luckily, my husband was between shows, so he was able to be home with our little one. And I was like, yeah, we can make this work. We can make this work. And of course, I have an army of a lot of them come from the Mean Girls tour of babysitters who are
Yeah.
friends and actors, and so they're really animated and wonderful and trustworthy, and they have saved me from finding a random person to take care of my child and taking that leap. Instead it's dear friends. But that being said, I was easily popping back into a show because that was the identity that I always knew.
Yeah.
And when people say, what's it like to be doing this for the first time after you've had a child? Yeah, my body is like, you know, different from giving birth to a child,
Sure.
but and my heart and my hormones and all that stuff. But at the same time, it's like riding a bike because you're clicking back into that part of yourself that you've known for so long
Yeah.
and done for so long. So that it was easy to go back to work. Uh, it was hard to come home and to be like, oh, I've been gone and I feel so badly and that mom guilt and all that stuff. And, and then you keep telling yourself the child needs to see you work, the child needs to see you thrive and do what you do and all that stuff. And the older he gets, the easier that gets and the harder that gets because he
Yeah.
understands everything. My little guy is 2.5 years old now. So
Mm.
he's like, well, you have to work, you have to go to work, and that's difficult.
And he hasn't
So
yet seen you in anything, probably, right?
just on the living room carpet, I'll start to sing and he'll go, no, 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 mommy, no, mommy. And I'll say, no, you say, sing out, mommy. So he thinks that means for me to stop. So he goes, sing out, mommy. I'm like, I will.
Have you thought about how you'll navigate? I mean, I don't know, but when he is able to contextualize Mom, the Broadway star, like all of the things that you have done, and he will begin to see you on stage. How do you explain that to him?
I mean, this is a good question. I don't know, but with social media,
Yeah,
he can watch himself on TV. He can
yeah,
watch himself. We have this screensaver on our Apple TV that's pictures of him.
yeah.
And he just looks at himself all day, potentially, if that's scrolling. And on my phone, I can show him, what he just did on his scooter. And he he finds it very interesting. So I have watched some silly YouTube or silly Instagram videos of dogs or whatever
Yeah.
he's looking at with me, and someone will pop up who's like an influencer maybe or
Sure.
something, and and occasionally it is a friend of mine maybe who I say, oh, that's my friend so and so, and so now he's like, is that your friend? Is that your friend? Or he thinks everyone's a friend of mine who's playing on my phone, and or if they look remotely like me, is that you, mommy? So he's already, because of this world of social media we live in, comfortable with that, I guess. Not that I do a ton of TV, but um, recorded performances. He's already
Wild.
in it. Yeah, it's weird.
Anything coming up that you're excited about?
Not yet. I mean, I hope that some things solidify,
Yeah.
but nothing. Pretty dry at the moment. So I can. Hopefully, I'll have some news in a couple of months. Who
Love
knows?
that.
But just getting back out there and auditioning. I was just asked to do a city center show, which I love doing those. And I realized it had been 10 years since I had done my first, which was my only other.
What was your
And
first?
my first was Little Me.
Oh, my husband's favorite show ever.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he's obsessed with it. Did it in college, did it professionally after college, and it's his
Wow.
absolute favorite show.
Wow. So that was cool. And that was, aside from like little projects here and there since, that was kind of the last big production that I did. And hopefully big ones are coming. I don't know what the summer will hold because that stuff is just starting to audition now too. So
Yeah. What was the last City Center show you did?
the last one I did was Once Upon a Mattress.
You did Mattress. Oh, that was
I played the Nightingale.
The Nightingale of Samarkand. Yes, that revival was my Broadway debut, and I will hold that show in my heart forever, flawed though it may be.
What a great time. I mean, these city center shows, you have 2 weeks of rehearsals. Now they're starting to do 2 weeks of shows, which when I did it before, I think it was just, Wednesday to Sunday.
Yeah.
And it's so cool to see how everyone starts to settle into their roles and, their parts. We as an ensemble felt very concerned about how we should respond and what this kingdom was and what kind of vibe we're going for. And so we all found our way together by the end of that run as this, trying not to bust out laughing at Sutton, doing the Song of Love at the end of Act One. My husband was like, it doesn't say, like, nothing huge happens in that show. Like, what's going to happen because of, telling the whole story at the beginning of the show. How it's going to all end up, but there's no cliffhanger at the end of Act One. You're just kind of like, oh, they just sang like a fun song about, her nickname.
Yeah.
And it's just like, oh, I wonder what they're going to do for Act Two, kind of thing, how they're going to wrap this up. And it's just fun. And I feel like it was a great family show. And it was great that it sold as well as it did because people just love Sutton Foster, of course, don't we all? Professionally and personally. And at the same time, everybody's kids came to it, except for mine. He couldn't sit still, of course, at that point. But anyone's kids who could come. And it was just, even before the final matinee, Cheyenne Jackson and Nikki were still going through their scenes and still making sure their timing was right.
Yeah.
And it was just great to see how everyone settled into, by week 2, it just was like slicker than it could have, as slick as it could be.
Slicker than it probably had any right to be. People don't realize because they show up, or I should say non-theater people, show up and they see a Broadway production without necessarily realizing that it's had 12 minutes of rehearsal and all of these actors at their A game, right? They get all of the names they can find, and then the hardest working, but they're terrified because they've had moments to put it all together, and the expectations are so high. But every time it comes out smelling like a rose. Every show I've seen there has been just thrilling. I remember their Grand Hotel looked like it could transfer the following day. I just saw Jelly's Last Jam, and it was unbelievable.
Yeah, so much amazing feedback on that. There's always since it's had recent transfers, there's always hope, and that things could transfer.
Right.
I know Jelly's Last Jam. People were like, oh, I bet it'll transfer. Who knows? Because there's 8,000 things opening on Broadway right now in the season, and all the theaters are full. So like nothing soon. But
Right.
I think that the way they're going about it has really shocked everyone, in a way that they're like, well, that one should transfer, and that one should transfer too. Everything is just so good.
Well,
And the
Chicago
people are
kind of
amazing.
messed everything up for everybody because it was never part of the mission statement for encore shows to go anywhere. The whole mission statement was something that probably won't have a life. And then Chicago came in and said, "Fuck you, we're going to run forever." And now
Yeah.
there's always this hope and or expectation of, will this be the one? Will this one go? Which is wild to me how their whole sort of thesis has shifted over the years in really marvelous ways.
And who knew Chicago would find this niche of like reality TV stars coming in and like breaking box office records? It's
Right?
like random casting that surprisingly like relaunches the show. Like I did Kinky Boots as a replacement, and I was like sadly a couple of months after I didn't leave, but a couple months after booking that, SpongeBob, I booked SpongeBob, so it was going to be a bit in the future, but I knew that my time at Kinky Boots was going to be somewhat short-lived. I
Sure.
think I was there for 10 months. But because I was a swing, and I was so grateful to be a swing in that show, they kept bringing me back for stints of time to cover vacations, and,
Yeah.
you know, which was the gift they kept on giving. And what a fantastically fun building of people, always. That was always such a family to join and be a part of. But when I left, and one of the times they popped back in, Brendan Urie was there, and just like crazy fans outside before the show, and they shut down the block after the show. Like that, I think that show was about to close because Billy Porter was coming back,
Oh
and
wow.
I think that he was like, I want to finish it out, and then this, Brendan Urie situation came in, and it resurrected everything, and it ran, that much longer. Billy came and
Just
went, and
wild.
so continued. It was awesome.
Absolutely wild. That's one thing that Lion King hasn't navigated is sort of star casting. And it's the one sort of facet of the industry that we haven't experienced. Stage doors are different for us if they exist. It's
Yeah,
little kids who are there for the characters, not the actors. They want
yeah,
to meet Nala
yeah.
and well, never Scar. They're always scared of Scar. But they want to meet Simba. But it's so much less about the human being
It
that they
never
recognize.
had to. I sat in the audience of that show the night after it opened on
Oh
Broadway
my God.
because my roommate was an intern with the PR office. And she's like, I have these tickets to Lion King. I was like, oh, I love that movie. And we went, and an elephant walked past me, and I was just a wreck. I was, just into it was, and I've seen it a few times over since, and
Sure.
it's probably the show I want to take my son to
Yeah.
first. Just so beautiful, and this, of course, the staying power has, it has that kind of staying power, because as long as get wonderful people inside those costumes, and use them as expressively as that opening night cast, why shouldn't it run forever?
Yeah, and that show at the New Amsterdam in its original theater, it looked magnificent there. That elephant in that aisle with that balcony overhanging, it fit on such a scale that you just felt like you were
Yeah,
completely
I don't know.
enveloped by the animals.
I mean, I don't. I like all of the animals are my favorite, but I
Yeah,
think the woman doing the cheetah
the
was
cheetah is
like
my favorite. Yep.
glued to every scene.
Yeah.
She had such joy in her face, which is always a story I tell. If anyone's heard me on a podcast before, I always tell this long story that if we have time, we can get into. But basically, bringing joy into your performance and into the room for an audition has always helped me book time and time again. Like coming in defeated, of course, is never. It's a contagious, weird energy that nobody wants to watch.
Right.
And this woman had the joy that I was glued to her constantly.
Joy is contagious too, and it's not. It doesn't spread as quickly like wildfire as toxic energy does. You have to be persistent with the joy, I've found, but it is, and it trickles down from the top in any company, right? If the highest paid person in the building leads with grace and sense of humor and joy, it really tends to trickle down throughout the entire building, not just on stage, front of house, backstage. And I've been lucky enough to see really lovely examples of that. And I've seen the opposite.
I feel like Jerry Mitchell is that.
Oh, I love
He
that.
was very, like when we were out of town with Legally Blonde, I think our set broke like the day before previews. And I was like, oh. He's like, all right, they'll fix it. Come on, let's go in the lobby. We're going to go rehearse. You know, he was just like,
Yep.
moving on, moving through. Like I always say, he led that parade with like a big pink flag and was just, all, joy and happiness and just laughing his way through everything. And it really
showed.
down to all trickled into the show.
Yeah.
Tenfold.
Yeah. I mean, you can see that in all of his work, actually. I mean, from Broadway Bears extended out, casting that net so wide. He's just, I've never worked with him or met him, but one day,
wonderful.
Jerry, come do the podcast if you're listening.
Yes, he should. He's so fun. And then alternatively, I did the out of town tryout of Finding Neverland, and our creatives would come out of production meetings like because Harvey Weinstein had these big production meetings, and as a movie guy, I don't think he wasn't speaking musical theater language. It was a whole different kind of animal, and they were just like, ugh, it's so hard. It's just so hard. And that was difficult. Like you were like, hi, everybody. No.
Do you know Raj? Do you know Robert Anthony Jones? Did you do Finding Neverland?
Yes.
He was on the podcast, and we talked about that moment at the end of the play is probably the most singularly theatrical moment I've ever witnessed on stage. And like ugly crying, like projectile crying. When that death tornado of glitter happened, I nothing could bring me back from that. I was done. So beautiful.
Even stage watching it too. They had God, what was that guy called? There was a designer. Let me say like wind designer or something. More flowery than that. Who actually designed that scenario? Designed that effect.
Yeah.
And it was just so so effective, as you said. We all were just like, when we first saw it. And every night I would have loved to have continued with that show, but found that I had to choose between that and Honeymoon in Vegas. And I felt like what I was doing in Honeymoon in Vegas was more in my wheelhouse. And so I chose that one. And I knew that every time I knew that Finding Neverland was going to be like a big, just a big, amazing piece of theater that people would love to see.
Right.
And I felt like Honeymoon in Vegas was too, but sadly, it didn't last as long. I loved it. I really hoped. Everyone who saw it loved it.
I loved it.
Not everyone saw it.
Yeah, Nancy Opel. I'll never get over watching her just doing what she does, unlike anyone else. Just completely bananas in the best way. Rob, the whole cast was just fabulous.
Oh yeah, the whole company, and my husband and I were just talking about this. The whole company. I think the difference was everyone was seasoned, and if they weren't, they're about to be. Like Jonathan Saxon was one of our swings. I don't know if you know her.
I don't.
But she graduated from Syracuse, as did I, and like 5 years later, she had 5 Broadway shows.
Yeah.
One of them. She was out on Mean Girls with us. She played Karen. She was in the original company of Mean Girls and understudied Karen, and then popped out on the road with it.
Amazing.
Wonderfully talented lady. Was brand new to New York, and she was our swing. And she just, she just watched everyone because it was such a seasoned group of people who had been around so much and so collaborative and so supportive of each other. And so it was like doing a show with all your buddies. And my husband was not original, but was a replacement crew member at Something Rotten, and
Mhm.
he's like that's the same feel of that show. Like everyone had been around so much and was just like top of their game, professional and hilarious and wonderful, and he just loved being around in going to work with that
Yeah.
company
And you can
as
feel that from the audience. Like you can feel that in the house when a company is just sort of gelled and grown and seasoned. Yeah.
yeah.
Galen, I got to wrap us up. We're at half hour. We're a little past half hour. I tend to do that. But I can't thank
Look,
you
not every
enough.
show goes up on time.
Very few go up on time. But I can't thank you enough for taking the time out of your day. I know how busy you are to come chat with me. I'm thrilled to get to know you. Our mutual friends list is long and extensive, and I so hope that we cross paths in person one day soon.
Yes, I hope so too. Thank you, Tom.
Of
This was so
course.
much fun.
Thank you. Have a great rest of your day, and hope we see you soon.
Okay.
Take care.
Thanks again.
All right, that's half an hour.
Thank you, half hour.
Boxland Media. Think big.